Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the United Nations Population Fund UNFPA Turkey's YouTube channel for the launch of the UNFPA's annual flagship publication, the State of World Population Report. And this is Buket Güler. I'll moderate this high-level important event today. This is SWOP Report entitled "My Body is My Own," claiming the right to autonomy and self-determination. Through the report, UNFPA highlight what is bodily autonomy, why bodily autonomy is a universal right, and how this right can be ensured for every woman all around the world. Today, we'll discuss the key findings of the reports, the global situation, the situation in Turkey, progress in the field, and also the steps to be taken all together with the distinguished panels. Let me first introduce them to you. We'll start our event today with the opening remarks. Ms. Alana Armitage, UNFPA Eastern Europe and Central Asia Regional Director, will give a general information on UNFPA and also talk about the importance of the SWOP and its objectives. Then Dr. Hasan Mohtashami, UNFPA Turkey representative, will tell us what is bodily autonomy, its necessity, and UNFPA plans to achieve bodily autonomy for every woman in Turkey. After these opening remarks, we'll continue with the report's presentation. Sexual reproductive health and public health expert Dr. Nuri Ortaylı will share the key highlights of the report with us. Then we will move to the panel discussion. And here we are honored to have the opportunity to host two European Union ambassadors today there with us. Mr. Danny Annan, ambassador of Denmark to Turkey, and Mr. Stefan Perström, ambassador of Sweden to Turkey, and they will share their valuable reflections on the report and the effort of their countries on sexual and reproductive health and rights and gender-based violence as well. The panel will also be joined by two distinguished representatives of academia and also civil society, Professor Dr. Fatma Gül Berktay, Professor of Political Science and Women's Studies, will draw a general picture on Turkey's situation regarding women's bodily autonomy and also women's rights. And Nurcan Müftüoğlu, General Director of Turkish Family Health and Planning Foundation, will talk about sexual and reproductive health and rights in Turkey. On behalf of UNFPA Turkey, I'd like to thank all these distinguished participants in advance for their valuable inputs. Before we start, I would like to remind to you of our dear audiences, you can follow the panel both in English, also in Turkish on UNFPA's Turkish YouTube channels, and you can share your thoughts and questions via the comment box. Let's start with opening remarks then. Dear Ms. Alana Armitage, we are so happy to have you here today. And now the floor is yours for your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Buket Güler. It's such a pleasure to have you as our moderator. Greetings to the distinguished panelists, excellencies, ambassadors of Denmark and Sweden, distinguished members of academia and civil society, and of course to everyone watching us right now live today. I am so excited to be in the launch of UNFPA's State of the World Population Report in Turkey. The State of the World Population Report is UNFPA's annual flagship publication. And this year, the report is very special. For the first time, a United Nations report focuses on bodily autonomy, the power and agency to make choices about your body without fear of violence or having someone else decide for you. The new UNFPA State of the World Population Report, entitled "My Body is My Own," shows that globally, nearly half of women, nearly half, lack the power to make their own decisions about whether to have sex with their partner, about whether to use contraception, about whether to see a doctor or a nurse. Often these decisions are made by others, whether partners, families, societies, or even the government. The right to autonomy over our bodies means that we must have the power and agency to make choices without fear of violence or having someone else decide for us. Intertwined with bodily autonomy is the right to bodily integrity, the ability to live free from physical acts to which one does not consent. For many people, especially women and girls, life is fraught with violations of their bodily autonomy and their bodily integrity. Bodily autonomy is violated worldwide by practices like child marriage, female genital mutilation, so-called honor killings, so-called virginity tests, and so-called bride kidnapping. And the list goes on and on. What was previously bad is now worse with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has resulted in increasing violence, more unintended pregnancies, and new barriers to healthcare access, along with job and education losses. All of these practices have one thing in common. They are rooted in deep-seated social norms that attach lower value to women and girls, that see women and girls and their bodies as being owned by someone else. So what needs to be done? The report emphasizes that governments have a lead role to play. By fulfilling their obligations under human rights treaties, governments can alter the social, political, institutional, and economic structures that reinforce and thrive on those unequal norms. Bodily autonomy is a foundation for the enjoyment of all human rights, including the right to health and the right to live free of violence. Institutions and leaders are therefore obligated to extend all the support and resources required for us to carry out our choices in a meaningful way. Men must become allies in eradicating harmful social norms. Many more men, and I'm so pleased that we have many men with us on the panel today, but many more men should commit to stepping away from patterns of privilege and dominance that profoundly undercut bodily autonomy. But we need to look beyond obligations to opportunities, because a woman who has control over her body is more likely to be empowered in other spheres of her life. A child who has comprehensive, age-appropriate sexuality education is empowered to make healthy decisions in love and in life. And when we see these benefits grow across whole societies, we understand that families, communities, and countries will flourish when all people are empowered to make their own informed decisions about their bodies and their futures. My body is my own, a very simple but life-transforming statement. Let's make that a reality for everyone, everywhere. Thank you very much. Back to you, Buket.
Thank you very much, Ms. Almasic, for this remarkable speech. After your opening remark, I think the importance of the report, which is just released today, becomes more clear for our viewers. Thank you again for your opening remark. And now it's going to be my pleasure introduce you one of the other hosts of this event, Dr. Hasan Mohtashami, UNFPA Turkey representative. Mr. Mohtashami, we are so happy to be here with you. And now the floor is yours for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Madam Moderator Buket. I really appreciate your taking the time and being with us for moderating this discussion.
It's my pleasure.
I appreciate that. Thanks for all the panelists and all distinguished panelists that are with us today for this opening. I recognize the Ambassador of Sweden, Ambassador of Denmark, outstanding civil society and academicians that they are with us. We look forward to hearing from you, Nuray Khanum, Nurjan Khanum, and Fatima Gul Khanum. I am very grateful to all of you. And I will not do justice to if I don't thank my director, who has taken the time and freed her schedule to be with us today, Alana. And we are very grateful to everybody around this panel. Appreciate to be with us. As Alana highlighted, today we are delighted to launch at the country level, Turkey. The global launch and the regional launch was yesterday. So this is a launch for specifically for Turkey at the country level. The report that we are so proud of it. Each year, State of World Population Report is a flagship report for UNFPA, where we pick up one of the very pertinent topics of the day and then elaborate on it, do the analysis over the year, and then present it for the consumption by all the stakeholders in that specific topic. This year is extremely, extremely important topic, as highlighted by my director. My body is my own, the basic element of any discourse around human rights, where as simply as it is, this is not the case for women around the world. Half of the women, you heard Alana, half of the women in one way or another don't have access, don't have control over their body integrity and autonomy. That's as simple as it is. The reality is hard, but we should face it. I was asked to highlight 2 points: the why and the what in Turkey, for UNFPA Turkey, what we are going to do and why bodily autonomy is important. Let me just, some of you have heard me of saying that the theory of change is very, very simple in this connection. Sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls is the foundation for women empowerment, gender equality. And women empowerment, gender equality is the bedrock for overall development, growth, and prosperity. We cannot achieve women empowerment, gender equality agenda without ensuring the fulfillment of sexual and reproductive health and rights of women. Until we ensure in all contexts that women have full control over their fertility and body integrity, there will be limited chance to ensure gender equality agenda, women empowerment agenda is addressed. And doesn't matter what type of control women are deprived. Is it in some countries, it's about forcing women, coercive measures to reduce their fertility. In some countries, it's the other way around, depriving women from having access to contraceptives. In other countries, it's in the form of child marriage, forcing a young girl to get married as early as before the age of school age. Or it could be other forms of prevalent cases of female genital mutilation in some parts of the world, or any other form and shape. The whole point is that the full control over the fertility and body integrity is the basic step for ensuring sexual and reproductive health and rights of women are secured. And then women empowerment, gender equality agenda is now met the targets that we are talking about. For UNFPA is raison d'etre, is our core mandate. This is what we do. This is what we have been doing for 5 decades now, over 5 decades now. And we are proud to be called Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency within the UN system. In Turkey, we focus on particularly two areas: sexual and reproductive health and rights, and gender-based violence. These are the areas that are UNFPA mandated globally and focused in Turkey. We are particularly proud to try to reach those key groups in our communities that are left behind and most of the time are denied or neglected in the services. Those groups of vulnerable groups in the communities that are not necessarily met with the information and services that they require. Left no one behind. That was the motto of UNFPA even before all these new jargons are in place. So we are working on sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls with disability. We are working on sexual minority group with different sexual orientation. We are working on sex workers, information and services needed for them. We are working with the people with the HIV positive status and provide more information and services for them. So leaving no one behind is not just a jargon for us. It's something that we deal with it on a daily basis in different initiatives that we follow. And we are extremely grateful for all the partners we have in Turkey. The government, the development partners, the civil society, and the academia. They are all have done great in partnership with UNFPA, and we are grateful, and we register our appreciation for this and hope that this will expand. And one last point in Turkey, I really hope, because Turkey has been a model for many other countries in terms of achievements in sexual and reproductive health and rights. Some of the indicators are a bit now showing other trends, and we hope we can get back on the right trend for those indicators, so that we can share the good experience and successful example of Turkey with the entire world again and again in future. I thank you so very much. Appreciate. Back to you, Madam Moderator, and thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Motoshami, for this valuable speech and messages. As you mentioned, now it's more clear, denial of bodily autonomy is a violation of human rights, and these violations, as you mentioned, includes rape, virginity, testing, female mutilation, and more. But unfortunately, you highlighted nearly half of women are denied their bodily autonomy. I hope with UNFPA's plans in Turkey that you mentioned, one day every woman can proudly say, "My body, my choice," and we'll all have the power to say yes, the right to say no. Thank you again. From now on, we'll be starting to discuss the details of this report. But let me thank to Ms. Alana and Mr. Motoshami again for their opening remarks. It was for your meaningful speeches. It was such a effective starting, I think. At this point, from now on, we'll hear the key lights of the report. And this report is very important, as Alana Armitage, Ms. Armitage said, because for the first time, a United Nations report focuses on bodily autonomy. As I mentioned, nearly half of women are denied their bodily autonomy. So we can say the headline is this, but of course we know there's much more. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure now turn to Dr. Nuriye Ortaylı, the sexual reproductive health and public health expert. Thank you for being us today, dear Ms. Nuriye Ortaylı. We are already learned something about the report, but we are really excited to learn more the results of the report. I know it's really difficult to analyze and brief this annual report within a limited time, but unfortunately we have limited time. So I don't want to waste your time. Please, Ms. Ortaylı, over to you.
Good morning, and Excellencies, dear ambassadors of Denmark and Sweden, regional director, country representative, esteemed colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to be here today to introduce the report on bodily autonomy, my body, my own. And I'm also excited because I think this is a new an important milestone for the UN system and for all of us, for women and girls all around the world. I also want to thank especially to the regional director and country representative, because they made my job easier. They already introduced the basic concepts and what is the importance of State of the World Population Report, and also why bodily integrity, but bodily autonomy are important. I think we can start showing a few slides. This is, as my colleagues have already emphasized, this is the first UN report on this subject. So I just want to say a little bit about the history of the issue. Actually, bodily autonomy is a concept which was brought to the attention of UN system as early as 1994. Our famous 1994 International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo was the first time, I think, bodily autonomy was described and was linked to sustainable development in a UN document. Ever since, I think we made a lot of progress on this issue. And finally, we are happy to see that this concept has become part of Sustainable Development Goals. These are the goals which all the governments agree to work towards and to achieve by 2030. Bodily autonomy and self-determination is now one of the targets under 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You may find it a little bit hierarchic, and but not to make it too complex. I would say Sustainable Development Goals are about 17 goals, which are important for the whole world to reach to be in the path of sustainable development. And under those, we describe targets. And bodily autonomy is one of the targets to reach gender equality and empowerment of women and rights. And also, in order to measure this, because we know what gets measured gets done, in order to measure this, governments signed to use certain indicators. And we have two indicators related to autonomy and self-determination. One of them is figured 562 because it is under goal 5 and target 6 of that goal 5. And we have two indicators. One is about bodily integrity, and the other is about laws, policies, regulations in a country which ensure that women have bodily integrity. So the first one about bodily integrity and autonomy is measured using questions from These questions are DHS, you may not know, it's the demographic health surveys, which are usually held across. Can you go back to the other slide? Which are held across all countries nearly, and from 2019 on, they have started asking women about if they decide about when they get health care, if they decide about when and if whether to use contraception. And they also have a question about, do you have can you say no to your husband or your partner if you don't want to have sex? So these questions are going to be used to measure this indicator. And actually, there has been a few reports. We could move to the next slide and the one after that. Actually, during the last 2 years, already there have been about 57 countries which have included these questions in their demographic and health surveys. Based on that, this is only, of course, a quarter of the countries, not all countries, but based on that, we have some preliminary results and we can make a guesstimate about how things are all over the globe. I mean, in a few countries, the best, 75% of women have answered positively to all these questions. I mean, the decision about receiving healthcare, the decision about using contraception, and the power to say no when they don't want to have sex. So a combination of these three questions, if they answer positively to all these three, the indicator considers them to have autonomy. And we see that only within the best region and within the best country, only 75% of them have the power over their bodies, have the choice. And overall, globally, we have like 55% of the women, or only a little bit more than half of the women, have control over their bodies, according to this indicator. So this shows that we have a lot of way to go. And of course, first we need to collect more information from all the countries on these indicators. And more importantly than that, we have to start making progress. But I think it is good that we have this indicator, although we know that it's not perfect, because we know what gets measured gets done in the end. This is going to be a positive push for all the governments to change the situation on the ground. Second indicator related to autonomy and self-determination is measures existence of laws, regulations, and policies regarding reproductive health care, regarding sex education for young, availability and the quality of sexual education, reproductive health and sex education for younger people, and access to services. So this also kind of measures existing law measures, if there are laws and regulations, policies in place. And it's also, I believe, is going to give a push to the governments to move in this direction and to improve the situation in their countries. But of course, we are aware that, these indicators, I mean, they have been created to quantify and to measure progress. But we know that they're far from being perfect. We know that they don't cover all aspects of autonomy and determination. There are a lot of qualitative things involved, which we cannot measure across a country or even across the globe. So there are many issues which are beyond the parameters of these indicators, which we should be aware of. For example, child marriage. Actually, the list is longer in the report, but I took out only the ones which I think are pertinent for Turkey, for our country, the issues which we struggle. So, I mean, some of these parameters, which are beyond the indicators, are also very important for us to measure the progress and to work on, to make improvements. One is child marriage, the other is denial of comprehensive sexuality education. I mean, this issue is especially when I was a young physician, this was an issue in Turkey, or actually lack of it was an issue in Turkey. And unfortunately, now I'm retired and it's still an issue. And not much has changed. It's such a taboo, contrary to progress made in other areas of sexual and reproductive health. Forced marriage, though decreasing, is still an issue. Honor killings, the same. Marital rape, though it has been defined in the law in Turkey, but it's really difficult to see that, you know, women go and complain and really can use the help of state and the legal system to deal with this problem. Marry or rapist laws, it's not currently in place, but we see a lot of pushes from conservative parts of the political system to bring these laws back, outdated laws, but you know, we still see that some people work for them. Reproductive coercion, this is, I think, is quite common, something even we don't try to measure, which we should be aware of. And virginity testing, again, in the decline. And despite Medical Association has taken a very brave point here, trying to train and persuade its members, it's still ongoing, we know from anecdotal evidence. Okay, can we move to next slide? So determinants of women's decision-making power, we know that it's beyond policies, it's beyond laws. There are many factors in it. Community is a factor, health systems is a factor, interpersonal relations, and also socioeconomic conditions. Actually, a woman's ability to determine self-determination and to autonomy depends very much on her life and her opportunities in other spheres of life. Here, I want to highlight one thing, which actually the last chapter of the report talks about. You may do a lot in health systems. You may provide health services. You may change laws and regulations, but still there are other factors which get into the way of women in enjoying their fundamental rights, their rights to decide about their bodies. The report focuses on abortion, even in countries where it's legal. So I would like to give an example from our country's history and today, actually, what's going on, as a good example of this. So we must be, I mean, though we have made a lot of, I think, progress in putting these indicators into the Sustainable Development Goals framework, which I think is going to have a very positive impact, but we must be aware that we have problems beyond these indicators. So let's move to other slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So abortion in Turkey, and this is an interesting history, so I would like to just remind you about it. It was liberalized in 1983, and up to 10 weeks, you could obtain an abortion in public hospitals and clinics before 10 weeks of pregnancy. And there was also an effort at the time and in the following years to increase access to public and private sector. For example, at the time, they have given the privilege to GPs, general practitioners, I mean, not non-OBGYNs, non-specialists, to perform abortions, to provide abortions in public clinics. And this has really increased access at public sector, public hospitals. And after 1983, it was rates increased initially, of course, because it was more available. And I think also it was more recorded because it has become legal. But following that, in early 90s, several programs were put into place to integrate family planning with abortion. Post-abortion care was improved. And also, as you know, information about and access to family planning services increased, abortions rate decreased slowly in 90s, starting from 90s. And currently it's not absent, but it's not as high as it used to be in 80s, around 0.17 per woman. Next slide. Next. So we thought that this issue was over. And actually, I mean, this was, I graduated from medical school in 1983 when abortion was legalized. And all through my professional life as a clinician in Turkey, I was proud that we have overcome an issue and we had innovative solutions. And we were kind of like among the best in developing world and in our region. But in 2012, the government, then the government, still there in power, they attempted to restrict abortion. There was a widespread public outcry. All women's organizations were mobilized, widespread demonstrations, and also in newspapers, media, everybody kind of thought that restricting abortion was not a smart thing to do. So the government stepped down. They decided not to send the amendment bill they were planning to the parliament. Instead, they did something which they said they were going to increase the quality of services, abortion services. From now on, it could not be performed by GPs. It has to be performed by obstetricians and gynecologists. It had to be performed at a hospital with full facility, not at an outpatient clinic. It has to be an inpatient procedure. And they also introduced around the same time, the conscientious objection of some physicians to perform abortions, which seemed like a right-based attitude. But next slide. What happened as a consequence is, this is the summary map of Kadir Has University, which regularly does surveys to see where abortion services are available. And you see that all around Turkey, I mean, out of 500 something hospitals, they could reach about 300 to ask the question if they provide abortions. And you see that only 10 hospitals provide abortions, which is actually legal totally. But they somehow find excuses not to provide this. So this is a good example that you have the law, you have the health infrastructure, and actually you have the cultural acceptance, community acceptance, because for years abortion was provided in Turkey. People talked about it with their friends, with their neighbors, with their mother-in-law, etc. So it wasn't a taboo, but just by the a change in the political power or the attitude of political power, you see that a widely available service suddenly becomes inaccessible for many women, and especially poor women. And this is not only for abortion, unfortunately, which may consider the taboo for many countries. It's also true for family planning, a program which we have been so proud during 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Next slide. Yeah, here just it shows that as Kadir Has University repeats these surveys each year, the situation is getting worse in terms of access to abortion services. Next slide. Yeah, the other issue, as I said, it's not the only taboo subject of abortion. We see some very, how do I say, unsettling signs also in the sphere of family planning, where unmet need for family planning has doubled during the last 5 years. Until that, starting from early 80s, unmet need for family planning was always going down. When I say unmet need for family planning, it's an indicator which measures among women who want to avoid pregnancy, those who do not use contraception. We call it that we consider them to have unmet need for family planning. So this was an indicator which constantly went down, starting from 80s till 2013. But we had a double increase of 100% between 2013 and 2018. And also another disturbing sign is that we also see that places where women get their contraceptives is shifting to private sector, which means they have to pay money for it, because, and also it shows that it's going to be more difficult for poorer women to access these services. There are several reasons for that. One might be the health reform, which took place around 2012, and which was kind of supported by World Bank and included its famous policies on performance-based financing and privatization.
Dear Ms. Ortella, would you excuse me?
Yes.
This is the most difficult part of my business at the moment. May I ask you to come to the
Yeah,
end
I'm just finishing.
Thank you for your
30 seconds. Okay?
Thank you for your
So, in 2012, we know that structural adjustment and health reform happened, and that was privatization and results-based financing, which we have seen in other countries, which has also had a negative impact on provision of family planning services. One may be this, and the other may be the policy changes regarding family planning, which was like dismantling of MCH services and kind of not giving the emphasis previous administrations have given to family planning. And it kind of became invisible, and with the environment where family planning was not involved in performance criteria, it kind of slipped through the cracks. So these are important issues. I mean, autonomy is important, self-determination is important, but we have to be aware that there are many determinants for it, and you have to be equally aware of all these factors, and you have to address all these, and not only concentrate on the indicators we have measured. And you may find some very good examples about this in the last chapter of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Ms. Ortali, for your understanding about timing.
Sure.
Thank you again for your presentation and this valuable speech. This data which you share with us and the statistics are very important to put the issue clearly here. What I understand from the report, from the things you mentioned briefly, education, legislation, gender equality, all are interconnected. Maybe shorter while we will discuss with the panel's details. But now I would like to thank you again for your contribution. And now I warmly welcome you to panel discussion. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, distinguished participants. Thank you again. You are here with us today. And I would like to start this section with Ms. Dani Anan, Ambassador of Denmark to Turkey. Mr. Ambassador, we are honored to have the opportunity to host you here today with us. We all listened Ms. Nuriye Ortaylı. She shared the key lights of the report and the situation in Turkey also, which are really remarkable. We see the realities with these data. We can say it's such a groundbreaking report, maybe. What does the report tell us? What's your overall reflections? And also we wonder your country's situation, for example, about the border autonomy and women's rights.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that I'm very pleased to be a part of this panel to mark the launch of the UNFPA State of World Population Report, which this year turns the spotlight on a very fundamental right for women and girls all over the world. Let me start by underlining that what emerges from the report is a stark and alarming picture. As we have heard already from the previous speakers, only 55% of women are able to make their own decisions on healthcare, contraception, and sex. In some countries, that figure actually goes down to just 1 in 10 women. That is simply far too many women and girls who have no say over their own bodies and or are forced to live with violence, abuse, and oppression. These women are deprived of living equal lives and contributing to society on equal terms with men. They are robbed of the opportunity to realize their full potential and to become empowered in other fields such as education, employment, and decision-making. In light of the sad truth that the COVID-19 pandemic is worsening the situation, this report should act as a catalyst for swift action to tackle this problem. The world needs to step up if we are to eradicate this problem in all its manifestations, ranging from child marriages to female genital mutilation to so-called honor killings. As the report points out, gender inequality lies at the root of the problem, and despite some progress in recent years, there's still a lot that needs to be done. It will take sustained and dedicated effort by many different actors, both at a national and global level, to erase the gender bias and secure a fundamental human right for women and girls, the right to decide over their own bodies and own sexuality. We have to act now, especially if we want to reach the SDGs by 2030. Denmark remains fully committed to the goal of ensuring gender equality and the empowerment of women under SDG 5. We believe that the progress we make on gender equality is also crucial for reaching the other SDGs. For that reason, Denmark strives to be a key player in international efforts to realize this goal. In 2019, Denmark, Kenya, and the UNFPA co-hosted the Nairobi Summit to mark the 25th anniversary of the historic International Conference on Population and Development. The summit aimed to formulate ways to accelerate the ICPD program of action and highlighted the UNFPA's 3 zeros: 0 unmet needs for family planning, 0 preventable maternal mortality, and 0 sexual and gender-based violence. The Danish Crown Princess, Mary, who is a long-time patron of the UNFPA and a passionate advocate of gender equality, is a member of the high-level commission tasked with monitoring and reporting on the progress on the Nairobi commitments. Currently, Denmark is also the co-lead of the Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and SRHR of the Generation Equality Forum. The Action Coalition Group has set 4 concrete actions to introduce transformational change. These actions are increasing delivery of comprehensive sexuality education to reach 50 million more children and youth by 2026. Increasing the quality of and access to contraceptive services for 50 million more adolescent girls by 2026. Also, increasing the knowledge of rights to empower 260 million more women and girls on bodily autonomy by 2026. And finally, also increasing accountability to, participation of, and support for women's organizations, women's human rights defenders, and peace builders. Denmark is also the current lead of the call to action on protection from gender-based violence in emergencies. This global initiative has a roadmap for 2021 to 2025 to change the humanitarian system and increase accountability for early action to prevent gender-based violence from the earliest phases of a crisis. This spirit of international solidarity also sits at the heart of Denmark's development cooperation policy. The 2021 financial bill has set aside 110 million euro as contribution to SRHR through multilateral channels. That figure excludes all our bilateral contributions Denmark makes through country programs. Let me finish by saying that I sincerely hope that our joint efforts, both nationally and globally, will secure a world where all genders enjoy the same rights and opportunities. Thank you again for having me on this panel. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, thanks for your contribution again. So during this event, as I said before, we would like to listen also about the perspective of academia as well. Honored guests, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Fatma Gül Berktay, Professor of Political Science and Women's Studies. And we are going to listen to you, Ms. Berktay. How does this report enlighten our way?
Thank you very much. And I'm really very pleased and honored to be here on this panel with all of you. Now, the theme of this State of World Population Report, My Body is My Own, is, of course, very important and more than timely. And according to the report, as Mr. Anand just mentioned as well, only 55% of women are able to make their own decisions pertaining to bodily autonomy, reproductive health, and this when 80% of the countries have laws supporting sexual well-being. Now, laws aside, the reality of women's lives in most countries paints a gloomy picture. The ongoing gender-based violence in all its various forms is assault to life, dignity, and personal and bodily integrity of women. Women's bodies are not their own in many societies. And I should like to emphasize that this is not confined to particular areas or cultures. Of course, they vary in degree, and here the approach and commitment of the political rulers to implement the laws is very important, makes a huge difference, as the case of Denmark shows, obviously. But there is another aspect, the upholding of traditional values and condoning violence under the pretext of cultural difference, even in secular frameworks. Now, any blanket deference to culture, religion, family, or the privacy rights in the family or in the community, of course, has disastrous consequences for women. And even when the majority of formal legal inequalities are removed, institutional structures and practices continue to reveal discriminatory treatment of women. The idea of female subordination runs so deep that it is still viewed as inevitable or natural rather than as socially or politically constructed by patriarchal ideology, interests, and institutions. And the patriarchal need to control women's bodies is reflected in the intensity of resistance to laws that aim to control women's bodies, to give the control to their own hands. And the rationale given is most often, again, the denial of, for the denial of women's rights, is the preservation of culture and the family. Now, this rationale has unfortunately become so very widespread in the last decade. And even within the European Union countries, as witnessed by the approach and practices of Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Bulgaria, whatever. This shows that the argument from the culture is not confined to some specific areas, societies, religions, and which are identified as problematic. And this rests upon a homogenized interpretation of culture. This sort of interpretation assumes that a certain culture is given and monolithic, which uniformly condones such practices and thereby builds a wall between the homogenized members of that culture and those outside it, and which does not recognize the dissent among the insiders. This inevitably strengthens the hands of the conservatives, traditionalists within such cultures. Instead, I think what should be aimed at is just the opposite. Listening to and hearing the voices and forging alliances with the dissenters of the culture. Here, I should like to cite Dr. Nafis Sadik, which her words really wonderfully explain everything in a nutshell. No cultural value worth the name permits or promotes the oppression and enslavement of women, she says. No cultural value permits women to go without education or health care, including sexual and reproductive health. No cultural value permits women's behavior to be the standard of cultural expression, while men behave as they please, and this is really very important. No cultural value entitles a man to hide behind his sister's honor while he attacks other men's sisters. No cultural value holds women up to veneration as mothers while exposing them to death and disability in childbirth. These are not cultural values or human values. These are the means by which one group of people holds and uses power over another. And this is why women's human rights movement, while criticizing the pseudo-universal claims, also struggles against the unquestioning acceptance of cultural difference. And I remember that once Mona Sahlin pointed out that from an international perspective, it is clear that custom, tradition, or practices in the name of religion cannot be invoked by states to avoid their obligations to eliminate violence against women. But as I said before, I mean, patriarchal, cultural, and traditional mindset is so deeply entrenched that makes the implementation of laws very difficult. A case in point is Turkey, where the legal framework for securing women's human and reproductive rights is quite sufficient, as Dr. Ortaylı also mentioned. But the implementation of the law lags way behind. Law enforcement officials would rather preserve the family unit than protect the victims of gender-based violence. And, you know, they would like to preserve the family unit and send them back to where violence originates. And even before Turkey withdrew from the Istanbul Convention, judges would dismiss the use of the international law, such as CEDAW, because it does not apply to our traditions. Although, of course, everyone knows that the Constitution openly states that national law cannot override international agreements. Anyway, now we are faced with the annulment of an international law itself. So this is quite a revealing case in point for all I have said about culture, traditions, and dissenters within a culture, because the withdrawal was mainly instigated by the lobbying of various male organizations and caucuses trying to cling to their age-old privileges. Some examples, for example, are divorced and victimized fathers crew, Elimini victims group, etc. These groups, along with conservative writers, claim that the convention was destroying the family and therefore the social order itself. These pretexts are not particular to Turkey, as I said, and I don't want to cite again Bulgaria, Hungary, Slovakia, etc. But what is interesting in the Turkish case is that the majority of the population is against the withdrawal, and women's organizations and platforms are waging an incredible struggle in favor of it. So it is important that the international community, I think, to hear and listen to voices of the dissenters within culture in Turkey. And now I think we see a power loss by men due to women's gained rights and their insistence to use those rights. So the male need to control women and their bodies increases. Men's power loss sort of functionalizes violence as a mechanism of compensation, and therefore we see that it is increasing all the time in Turkey. So by way of conclusion, I would like to say that the Turkish case proves that although law is a powerful tool for social change, it is not a magic wand, of course, It demonstrates that deeply entrenched patriarchal cultural norms prove strongly resistant to change, especially when they embody the cultural and social prejudices and stereotypes about gender roles and identity. Moreover, traditional values towards women's sexuality is not necessarily dispelled with modernization processes. Violence against women is present in every society, at every level, regardless of class, race, or cultural difference. But as I said before, of course, the approach of the political rulers makes all the difference. And in a way, it is obvious that these, sensitivities do not develop in modern societies by themselves. They're always the outgrowth of special efforts and care, and especially by women themselves. So women in Turkey now are playing, my last sentence.
Okay, thank
They're
you.
well playing their part in this effort. But in order to respond to the brutal violation of women's human rights and to uphold women's right to own their bodies, governments, human rights organizations, and the global civil society need to act in concert and also oppose cultural relativist arguments that prioritize the preservation of cultural or religious rights over women's human rights. And it is a real relief that UNFPA in Turkey and elsewhere is deeply committed to this approach, which is reflected in the 2021 population report. Yes, our bodies are our own. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Now you can hear me. Thank you very much for your speech, your meaningful speech. And now I'd like to turn to Stefan Hagström, Ambassador of Sweden to Turkey. Mr. Ambassador, thank you again for being with us here today and giving us this opportunity. I'd like to ask the same question to you. How does this report enlighten our way?
Dear participants, dear moderator, first of all, thank you very much to UNFPA for a truly excellent report. My perspective is based on the feminist foreign policy of the Swedish government, with the sexual and reproductive health and rights being one of three top prioritized areas. The rights of women and girls in particular, their rights to learn and to know, their right to freely decide over their own bodies, as highlighted in the report today, their right to say no. Absence or presence of these rights can determine the future for a young girl, and it can even mean the difference between life and death for her. I've experienced how this can hit in several countries during my years in our development agency, SIDA, and as ambassador, meeting girls fearing early marriages, seeing girls dropping out from or even being expelled from school because of early pregnancies or for other causes, such as no access to manage and uphold proper menstrual hygiene, experiencing the lack of comprehensive sexuality education, denying girls as well as boys their right to know. Too often, the rights-based approach is neglected in the context we are dealing with today. Therefore, I'm happy that it's so clearly articulated in the whole approach of today's report, claiming the right to autonomy and self-determination. I think the overall global picture in this regard, as my Danish colleague also stressed, should be seen as a call for intensified and urgent action. The reality in so many ways is bleak, and there have already been many facts, figures quoted from the report. And just to add some other facts, worldwide, each year 25 million unsafe abortions take place, leading sometimes to deaths, often to short and long-term injuries. We see huge numbers of early pregnancies. We see every year 12 million girls in the world under the age of 18 getting married, often against their will. At some point in their lives, about 1 in 3 women worldwide experiences gender-based violence, most often from an intimate partner. Widespread rights violations, hate speech, harassment against LGBTQI people belong to this very challenging overall picture. And as a regional director emphasized, we need to reach out to men and boys as well as to women and girls. Like sexual assault, it doesn't just happen. It's committed through men's power over women, or men's efforts to exercise power, and through the continued existence of gender stereotypes and gender inequality. To stop that, these men, so many of them, too many of them, simply must change their behavior. It is as simple and as difficult as that. Sweden is a strong supporter of the Istanbul Convention, the international gold standard in the fight against gender-based violence. My country has prioritized SRHR for a long time, both domestically and in our development cooperation. In our country, we can see how important gender equality and SRHR have been for our development as a nation. Comprehensive sexuality education, and now recently revised with input from the new Swedish active consent legislation, has been a part of this. Access to contraceptives as well, an affordable and high quality daycare system for children, parental leave also for fathers, now used by over 80% of them. All these have been instrumental for women's participation in the labor market and for the development of our economy and our welfare state. The right to safe abortion, firmly established in the mid-70s, has made a huge difference for women, making their right to decide over their own bodies much more of a reality than it previously was. And I want to emphasize the importance of this, the importance of not only making abortions legal, but also making the abortion services available. More than half of our development cooperation through SIDA in the area of health goes to sexual and reproductive health and rights. Gender equality and SRHR are at the core of our dialogue with partner countries, Tanzania and Myanmar being a couple of them where I've been engaged myself. It's at the core of our dialogue within the boards of the multilateral agencies and in all possible international fora. So my 4 main points would be Istanbul Convention, comprehensive sexuality education, the importance of engaging men, the importance of making abortion services available. Together with Belgium, Denmark, and the Netherlands, Sweden, a couple of years ago, launched the movement She Decides. And let me end by quoting its core message, because it has really gone to my heart and is very much in the spirit of the report being launched today. When she decides, the world is better, stronger, safer. She decides whether, when, and with whom to have sex, to fall in love, to marry, to have children. She has the right to information, to healthcare, to choose. She's free to feel pleasure, to use contraception, to access abortion safely, to decide, free from pressure, free from harm, free from judgment and fear. Because when others decide for her, she faces violence, force, marriage, oppression. She faces risk to her health, to her dignity, to her dreams, to her life. When she doesn't decide, she cannot create the life she deserves, the family she wants, a prosperous future to call her own. We and you and they and he are uniting, standing together with her so she can make the decisions only she should make. Political leadership and social momentum are coming together like never before, but we can go further and we can do more. From today, we fight against the fear, we right the wrongs, we mobilize political and financial support, We work to make laws and policies just. We stand up for what is right. Together we create the world that is better, stronger, safer, but only if and only when she decides. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for your contribution. And let's turn our last speaker today. Next, I'm honored to invite Nurcan Müftüoğlu, General Director of Turkish Family Health and Planning Foundation. Dear Ms. Nurcan Müftüoğlu, thank you for being here today with us. We want to hear your ideas about the report in general. Also, we would like to hear the situation in Turkey in your perspective.
Thank you. UNFPA's annual reports are the key references in our field of work. I would like to thank UNFPA for the opportunity to be in this platform and to meet with the panelists in this event. The title, My Body is My Own, is also very meaningful regarding the processes experienced in the field of sexual and reproductive health and the current situation we are in as Turkey. Sexual and reproductive rights and health are inseparable from the human rights framework. We all know that effective action of governments to guarantee sexual and reproductive health and rights is very, very critical. The outputs of the International Conference on Population and Development in 1994 and Beijing Women Conference in 1995 in which our country actively participated and supported, is still very visionary, despite the passing of 25 years. Although considerable global and local progress has been made in the sphere of women's sexual and reproductive health and rights, women in some countries continue to face widespread denials and violations of their bodily rights, as the panelists gave the instances. Unfortunately, our country is on its own way to becoming one of these countries with what has been done and what has not been done in this field. The legal framework we have enables a holistic and right-based approach in the field of sexual and reproductive health. However, health policies, regulations, and practices started to move away from this framework with the Health Transformation Program after 2010. I don't have enough time to focus on every aspect of sexual and reproductive rights. I will talk about family planning. Deciding on whether to have children, deciding the number of children, and having a pleasurable and safe sexual life are important components for bodily rights, and each of one can be easily realized by effective provision of family planning services. We have serious concerns, challenges, and deficits in this area. Poor quality information and lack of counseling services. Let me remind you that there is no comprehensive sexuality education in our schools. We have to create alternative information channels through which sexuality knowledge will be passed on to adolescents, youth, women, and all individuals. Therefore, it becomes more important to be informed about the use of contraceptives. Maternal health care is fortunately one of the priority areas in our health policy. However, as long as you cannot provide post-abortion and postpartum family planning services, maternal mortality stays as a risk area. Within the new performance system of health transformation program, there doesn't exist any defined performance related to the family planning services. The absence of follow-up and incentives towards this service area brings to mind that this issue has lost its significance within the health system. While legally all contraceptives should be accessible within the scope of preventive health services, availability of contraceptive materials has been declining in recent years. We are working with community centers of local governments for women health training programs. For instance, few weeks ago, one of our participants from Adıyaman with 9 children was trying to access intrauterine device. But Family Health Center said that they do not have any contraceptive. And if she can buy one from the pharmacy, they can insert. But we know very well that a woman with 9 children couldn't afford to buy an intrauterine device. I'm going to skip some chapters of my speech about unmet family planning needs and abortion, since Dr. Ortaylı has already mentioned that. But I want to say that Turkey has a strong public health sector infrastructure, human and financial resources to deliver these services to its citizens. The strong capacity also applies to all other components of sexual and reproductive health services. Political determination and supporting health policies are the requirements for the implementation of a right-based and holistic approach. As a civil society organization working for women and sexual reproductive rights for 36 years, we have been striving to raise awareness and to empower women and girls to make informed choices about their bodies and lives. They should have owned their voices. They should raise their voices for their rights, and we should work together to create the options they can choose. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nurcan Müftüoğlu. I'd like to thank you all, our distinguished panels. I think this report and your speeches will enlighten our way, and with your field work, scientific study, and also changing these huge experiences. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and we have passed the Q&A session, unfortunately. And now we're about to end of this panel. After the discussions, I'd like to ask you, our distinguished panels participants, if you have any messages to policymakers or to women, we can hear you for your last sentences. Then I'm going to close this panel. Okay, then everyone said whatever they wanted before. I guess thank you again to all participants here. It was my pleasure today be here with you. And let's finish. We were here with these all distinguished speakers to launch UNFPA's annual report, State of World Population. My body is my own, claiming the right to autonomy and self-determination. We discussed what is bodily autonomy is, why bodily autonomy is a universal right, and the key findings of the report, the situation in the world, and also the situation in Turkey. And we talked about the steps to be taken. Let me remind you here that the recording of this important panel will be watched on UNFPA's Turkish YouTube channel anytime you want. UNFPA will continue to advocate for rights and dignity, for integrity of choices, fertility, as well as expand the possibilities for women and all young people to lead healthy and productive lives. Join UNFPA to leave no one behind. And thanks for being here today. Thank you again.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. If I may just to add on my voice and thank the panelists, wonderful, very rich contributions, and I am extremely grateful and delighted. I cannot let go. I need to highlight a couple of points, if you allow me, Madam Moderator. I know it's at the end of the period and it's finished, but I have to highlight a couple of points here. One, on the issue of contraceptive use in Turkey. The trend is alarming. Ambassador Stefan mentioned that globally there are 25 million unsafe abortions. 10% of those 25 million, 2.5 million, are happening in Pakistan, a Muslim, culturally conservative country. Why? Because women do not have access to contraceptives. In Turkey, unmet need for family planning is increasing. And please, that the surveys show those women at the age of 30 and above with more than three children or more are the ones that are demanding contraceptives, and they don't have access to that. That's the survey. So if there are advice to the governments who want to limit abortion, is to focus on contraceptives then. That's, of course, legal arguments around abortion is something else, and we need to engage in that, but access to contraceptives should remain the center point of the sexual and reproductive health policy. And the second point is on comprehensive sexuality education. The misconception that this is something against the values and culture, that's a misconception. Kids or children or teenagers need to know things about their life. We teach them about the Mars and Neptunes and elephants and everything in the schools, but we don't talk about basic life-saving skills and knowledge that they should. The best place to talk to the kids about these issues is the controlled environment of the schools, where we know what goes in and how it is said. It's teachers of that country who should decide what would be the best messages for the children in any given context and country, without prejudice of cultural values. Please, comprehensive sexuality education is the centerpiece for any sexual and reproductive health success in any given context. I'm sorry, Madam Bouquet, I have to jump in for those two things.
Sorry, Mr. Lesson. I'm sorry, Mr. Lesson. I couldn't hear you. Sorry. Thank you for your opening and closing remarks. Thank you for hosting us here today. And let me remind again, join UNFPA to leave no one behind. And again, thanks for being with us today.